85 million people speak Cantonese right now. That's more than Italian, more than Korean, more than Vietnamese. It's not on any endangered language list. So how can I say this is the last generation? Well, languages don't die by shrinking to zero. They die by failing to pass down. And that's where this whole story begins. See, how bad is it really for Cantonese right now? Because while last generation sounds dramatic, in Guangzhou, Guangzhou, the birthplace of Cantonese, a Jinan University survey found that 31% of young people born after 2000 can no longer fully speak their own city's language. In the city where Cantonese was literally born, it's called Guangdonghua or Guangzhouhua, nearly 1 in 3 kids can't speak it. But that's not even the worst one. Shenzhen, right next door, used to be a Cantonese-speaking fishing village. In the 70s, about 50% of residents spoke Cantonese. Today, it's about 4%. One generation, that's literally all it took. Now, Chinese natives, before you raise your pitchforks at me about Shenzhen, just let me explain everything first, okay? Shenzhen is a complicated one. But now let's look at the diaspora, right? Overseas Chinese, people like me. By the 3rd generation, 91% of Chinese Americans speak only English at home. In Canada, the median age of a Cantonese speaker is 50, where the national median is 41. And so what that means is that Cantonese speakers in Canada are aging out faster than they're being replaced. So before you say it, this isn't because of Mandarin, okay? We'll get to that. But regardless, the data is really real, right? Guangzhou, Samzan, the diaspora, we know we're close to being the last generation that actually speaks this beautiful language. But knowing that doesn't explain what's causing it, and more importantly, why? Why is this happening? I mean, I said it wasn't Mandarin. See, when a more prestigious language shows up, one tied to money, jobs, education, we know Mandarin's the new it language, families don't abandon their language out of hate, they abandon it out of love. I mean, I still remember my mom telling me, don't waste your time on Cantonese, learn Mandarin, it's more useful. She wasn't trying to kill Cantonese. Anyway, with fewer people wanting to learn Cantonese, the infrastructure really collapsed on top of it. San Francisco went from 4 Cantonese instructors in the 90s to just 1 lone professor today. Stanford's sole Cantonese lecturer retired for 20 years, and the school didn't even renew the position. No Cantonese on Duolingo, Rosetta Stone, or Babbel. On the other hand, we all know Mandarin's got all the attention, right? It's the language of China, the language of business, the language of opportunity. I mean, we all hear it, right? We all hear, you'll be left behind if you can't speak Mandarin, especially if you're Chinese. And so almost every single Cantonese person takes one look at that and says, it's all Mandarin's fault. Mandarin is the enemy. But is Mandarin really the enemy? See, I grew up hating being Chinese and more importantly, refusing to learn Mandarin or improve my Cantonese. Later on in my life, I learned the language, which is a story for another video. You can see that over here. But even then, I believe that I was learning the language of the oppressor, the enemy, the evil language that was destroying not only Cantonese, but Chinese culture as a whole. Because if you're not aware, Mandarin is it's a really recent language. Historically, each part of China spoke a different language, and it wasn't until less than 100 years ago that they really pushed Mandarin and made it the main language of China. So I learned Mandarin, but I always felt like it took away China's beauty, that it stripped away individual culture and language. I felt it wasn't necessary. Why not just have a China that speaks a bunch of different languages? But something happened recently that legit shifted my whole perspective on this. Because I was filming a video with a tribal community in China, had the camera equipment, the whole setup, the whole crew there, and we got there and I couldn't speak to anybody, not a single word. The tribal people in China didn't speak Mandarin and I didn't speak their language. And we were standing in front of each other with just nothing. And this little girl walks over, she's the kid of the family, and she's learning Mandarin in school. And through her, I could suddenly understand their culture, their stories, their lives. And that one language and the wall disappeared. And that moment really rewired how I think about this, because before I think I had a more narrow-minded view, right? I thought China was like Sichuanese, Shanghainese, Cantonese, Mandarin in the north, maybe like 10 or so languages. Inconvenient, but I thought, they should be able to make that work. I think Belgium has like 3 languages or something like that, right? But what I didn't realize was that China has over 50 distinct language groups. During World War II, military units from different regions literally couldn't coordinate. People died because soldiers couldn't understand each other. 1.4 billion people needed a way to talk to each other. It wasn't even a question. And that moment where it was almost like the reverse, right? Where I spoke the main language and someone else from the country didn't, it made me realize just how important it was for China to have a national language. And so it made me think, like, if I flip that perspective, if Cantonese was the national language and Mandarin speakers were learning Cantonese, I mean, would I be as upset? You know, would most Cantonese people be calling it like language genocide? No, I mean, they'd probably be happy the country has a national language that unites the people, and most importantly, you know, they'd be happy that it's their language. I mean, I'd be happy. So it made me realize that it wasn't that I disagreed China needed a national language, it was just that I was upset that it wasn't mine, which means that Mandarin is not the enemy. Now, do I wish the language was Cantonese? Of course, I think it's more beautiful. But Mandarin became the national language partly because it was the dialect of the capital, partly because of political decisions at that time. The point isn't why it was chosen. The point is that the country needed one. And blaming Mandarin for Cantonese's decline is like blaming the highway for your town getting quiet. The highway needs to exist. Hold on to that thought, by the way, the whole highway thing. But anyway, on top of that, you know, plenty of people are bilingual. I mean, I'm quadrilingual, right? You go to Europe, the average person there speaks like 3 to 4 languages. And I swear that's how it is with like almost every single European I meet. So the fact that people need to learn Mandarin shouldn't be a threat to Cantonese, because you can just learn to speak both. If Mandarin isn't the threat here, what about the government? You know, is China trying to like erase every single other language? Are they trying to do that? I've lived in China now for over 6 months. I'm here right now, actually. Escaping Canada's winter. And before coming, I actually believed 2 things. One was that China was really warm, which it's not. Okay, there's more of China that has a cold winter than a warm one. So make sure you pick the right winter escape place, because Chengdu definitely isn't. But more important and relevant to this video, I also believe that China wanted to erase Cantonese and every single other dialect or language, whatever you call it. We'll have a video on that. And let me be clear, I'm not pretending nothing happened, right? Historically, there was a heavy push to promote Mandarin, and that came at the cost of local languages. Schools shifted to Mandarin instruction. Local language use was discouraged in formal settings. In 2010, when there was a proposal to switch Guangzhou TV broadcasts from Cantonese to Mandarin, people in Guangzhou took to the streets in what became one of the biggest language-related demonstrations the city has ever seen. The proposal was dropped, so they won, but that happened. And it shows that, you know, this tension is really real. But there's a difference between, you know, we want everyone to speak Mandarin and we want nobody to speak Cantonese. And so the first one happened. We want everyone to speak Mandarin. But the second one, I'm not so sure about anymore. Because now that most of China speaks Mandarin and there is a clear, you know, national language in place, as of pretty much the entire 2020s, that like active erasure narrative didn't really match what I saw. Like in my hotel in Chengdu, the staff spoke Sichuanese to each other. The minute I walked up, they switched to Mandarin. Same pattern, right? In cabs, drivers spoke, you know, Sichuanese the whole ride and then switched for me. Kunming, when I was there, same story, it was their language. When I was in Guangxi, same story, their language. In Guangzhou, with Cantonese though, it was a different story, but we'll get to that. The point is though that if you visit China, you'll quickly realize that yes, okay, while you hear a lot of Mandarin, you also hear a lot of languages that aren't Mandarin. I actually highlight in one of my videos that mainland China is probably one of the hardest places to learn Mandarin, because half the time you're here, you're sitting there thinking you're stupid for not understanding someone, only to realize that they weren't even speaking Mandarin, because it can be hard to tell if they're speaking Mandarin or not if your Mandarin isn't that good yet. So from my personal experience, the dialects weren't dying. They were alive in every private conversation. On top of that, I mean, I got a haircut in Chengdu, all the music playing, not like Mandarin music, not Chinese music, it was Cantonese music. I went to a live music house in Yunnan and they were singing Cantonese songs. Nobody in those cities speaks any Cantonese. I'd actually make the argument that Cantonese is probably the most popular language in China after Mandarin. In fact, Guangzhou's latest 5-year plan is the first to formally pledge to protect Cantonese. In December 2025, China revised its language law for the first time in 25 years and kept the article allowing dialects for teaching. And so am I saying that there are 0 issues? No. I mean, 70% of Hong Kong primary schools now teach in Mandarin, right? That's gonna have consequences for Cantonese, whether it was intended to or not. On Douyin, China's TikTok, the platform was actually flagging Cantonese live streamers at one point for speaking like an unrecognizable language. Now, they said that they don't prohibit dialects and it was just, you know, their machines or whatever, but it still happened to a lot of creators and they were really upset about it. And that had consequences too. And I remember even hearing at some point that China banned Cantonese learning resources, and that was a huge thing in, you know, the overseas Cantonese community. And so I remember like when I got here, I searched Taobao for Cantonese learning resources, and I can do it right now. And you can see, like, if I go on Taobao, which is China's, you know, Amazon, and I search, you know, 学粤语, right, 学粤语, it's like you get a freaking wall of things. In fact, if you go on Baidu, which is like China's Google, and you search how to learn any Chinese dialect, there's like a million options for things. In fact, I actually used it to help me learn a bit of Taiwanese talk to my girlfriend's family because I feel like they're talking shit about me sometimes. And so the whole point of this is I'm not denying things happened in the past, but this distinction I keep coming back. The goal is everyone must speak Mandarin. The goal isn't nobody should speak Cantonese. And those are different things. The first one is gonna have collateral damage on Cantonese, and that's very, very factual, but it's not the same as like a targeted elimination. That's why the Guangzhou government is using the word protect when talking about Cantonese. That's their words, not mine. And so the reason this distinction really matters is because if you believe someone's actively trying to erase your language, the fight becomes political. But if the reality is that the focus is on Mandarin and nobody is stopping you from speaking Cantonese, they just aren't prioritizing it for you either, then the fight is different. Then the question becomes, how are we gonna actually help promote and get people to speak this language? Because waiting for someone else to prioritize your language won't keep it alive. If this isn't going to be the last generation that speaks Cantonese, it's because Cantonese people decided to teach their kids to feel that fire themselves. And so the real question then becomes, what's stopping Cantonese people from passing on the language to their kids? Why is my mom saying, don't focus on Cantonese, learn Mandarin? Because where I was growing up, we had schools that taught Cantonese, right? I had schools that taught Cantonese everywhere around me growing up. I went to Cantonese class growing up. But even with all that in place, I still refused to speak it. And my mom eventually said, just learn Mandarin. Don't focus on Cantonese. And so the question becomes, are parents deciding to teach their kids? Are youth even wanting to learn? Because here's the thing that I saw that really cracked everything open for me when I was in mainland China. Remember how I said that in Sichuan, in a lot of parts of China, I see youth speaking to each other in their dialect. But the funny thing is, actually in Guangzhou, I rarely hear it. Right? During my time here in Chengdu, I see youth speak Sichuanese to each other all the time. But in Guangzhou, literally, I hear them speak Mandarin, which makes no sense, right? Because Cantonese, we know, has way more cultural cool than Sichuanese. No offense to my Sichuan friends, but you guys play our Canton music everywhere. So why aren't parents passing it on? Why aren't youth wanting to learn? Why is this the last generation to speak Cantonese? Well, first let's get the obvious answer out of the way first. Sichuanese is a hard comparison because it's a closer cousin to Mandarin. Switching between them is like shifting gears in the same car. To be frank, after being here for a while, honestly, Sichuanese sounds kind of like tone-deaf Mandarin. No offense. But it sounds like Mandarin where you just say all the words in the wrong tone. Whereas Cantonese is a completely different vehicle. It's still in the Chinese family of languages, so it shares similarities, but it's nowhere near as close as Sichuanese to Mandarin. And that alone makes Sichuanese way easier to pick up alongside Mandarin. Because, look, our whole school is built on helping Cantonese speakers leverage their Cantonese to learn Mandarin faster. Because Cantonese is closer to Mandarin than English. And so, any Cantonese American, Cantonese diaspora can learn Mandarin much faster if they learn it our way rather than, through some traditional, Guaylo way, because it's closer. But Sichuanese to Mandarin is like that on steroids. If we have in our program people learning in 6 weeks, Sichuanese to Mandarin, it can be done in a week, in theory, right? And then that's my team's goal dream, which is very hard to achieve. But that's what I'm saying is that's how much easier it is. So for Cantonese learning and maintaining the language, it requires actual real effort. And for a lot of youth in Guangzhou, for some reason, that effort isn't worth it. The way they see it is Chinese society is moving towards Mandarin anyways. Their families can generally speak both Cantonese and Mandarin. And even a lot of jobs in Hong Kong now require Mandarin. And honestly, if your boss speaks Mandarin and your promotion depends on it, spending your limited free time improving Cantonese feels like a luxury. And I get that. Cantonese doesn't give them enough of a practical reason to justify that extra work. And parents typically, a lot of them don't have the worldview that their child can learn multiple languages. Same way, how many of us Chinese Americans, our parents told us, just speak English. Even when I was growing up, like I said, I had Chinese resources available for me, but my mom said, don't focus on that, focus on Mandarin because it's more useful. And so, is it worth it to learn this language, to pass it on? Or should someone like me just let myself be the last generation that speaks Cantonese? So that's the main question here. Because I'm 100% having my kids learn English, 100% having them learn Mandarin, but Cantonese? If I'm gonna add another language, why not Spanish? That would give them even more of a step up. For me, I speak English, French, Mandarin, and Cantonese. If you switch Cantonese with Spanish and through an Arabic, I'd basically have the infinity stones to communicate with the world, you know what I mean? And so the world's moving to Mandarin. Hong Kong business, whether you like it or not, will move to English and Mandarin. I see youth in Macau speaking Mandarin to each other instead of Cantonese. It sucks. The same thing likely will happen in Hong Kong. Probably not a ban, right? But instruction in Mandarin is gonna keep growing. And the responsibility of learning Cantonese will fall to the household. And so is it worth it? Is it worth saving, or should we just let it be the last generation? Let's go back to those places we started with, because something's happening in each of them that kind of really affects that answer. So you remember Shenzhen? 48% to 4%. That's the warning, right? That's what happens when nobody fights for it. And the thing is, Shenzhen is one of the tech hubs of China. A lot of people moving in from outside the province who aren't native Cantonese speakers. It's a relatively new city that didn't have much Cantonese identity in the first place. And so for them, right, it wasn't worth the effort. Like that's why it fell, right? Nobody banned Cantonese there. It wasn't prioritized, and now it's gone. Shenzhen is what inaction looks like. But Guangzhou is a different story. Yes, 31% of Guangzhou can't speak it, of Gen Z, but the city isn't rolling over. Remember those protests I mentioned? The TV broadcast, the Douyin revolt, that fighting spirit is why things are shifting. Which is why, like I mentioned, right, the government formally pledged to protect Cantonese for the first time. And an elementary school there made Thursdays Cantonese Day. The entire day connected in that language. The birthplace took hits, but it's fighting back. Then there's Hong Kong. 88%, of course, can still speak Cantonese. And that's because Cantonese in Hong Kong is much more than just a language. Just like in Guangzhou, but to a bigger level, it's an identity marker. A way of saying this is who we are, and that pride is real, and it's driving preservation. Which is why Cantopop's filling stadiums again. The Performing Arts School for Cantonese Opera just hit record applications. And so it is absolutely in these places. If the birthplace is fighting for it, if Hong Kong is holding the line, then the language isn't dead. It's not even close. It's harder to maintain than Sichuanese, but it's also more popular and the people are proud of it. In fact, this is something really amazing, but one of our team members at Canton and Mando is a Gen Z person from Guangzhou who didn't speak Cantonese growing up. She spoke Mandarin. She learned English, but then she went back and also learned Cantonese later on in life for identity. And also so she could speak to her grandparents. And so the language pulled her back. And so she felt like, I'm Chinese, I speak Mandarin, but I'm also Cantonese and I want to speak Cantonese too. And so I don't think, Cantonese is gonna roll over in China because people have a very strong sense of identity there. It's so attached to the culture. People are really proud of it. The music is playing constantly. So I don't think so. But where I am worried, and where this video is specifically targeting, is the Cantonese diaspora abroad. Because this is the place where it very much could be the last generation. Now, before we get into that, I want to talk a bit about something a bit more positive, because it's all been like, Cantonese, Mandarin, whatever, but let's actually focus on what makes Cantonese so amazing and worth preserving, because we have to highlight that before we actually get into the community abroad, because that's a complicated topic. First off, the music. Cantopop isn't just popular in Guangdong. Like I mentioned, it's played everywhere. Literally in barbershops in Chengdu, in live music houses in Yunnan, in karaoke rooms all across Southeast Asia. Cinema. Hong Kong cinema shaped an entire generation of filmmakers worldwide. I will have a video on that too. The food culture, dim sum, ta san tang, right? The entire Cantonese food that's considered one of the finest in the world. The humor, the expressions, if you know, you know. Cantonese has this energy that just doesn't translate. The slang, the wordplay, the way you can say something in 4 syllables, the way you can say all these things, there's a reason that so many of us are proud of this language. Not just a little dialect, it's an entire universe and world. Which is why on this channel, one of the things I'm so focused on is not only teaching help people improve their Cantonese, which is why a lot of people say, Sheldon, you focused on help people learn Mandarin. But I'm like, no, I'm focused on help people learn Mandarin and improve their Cantonese. Because Mandarin is, obviously it's important for the future, we need it, but Cantonese is what the pride is. It's my pride. That's why I make all these videos, to do both. And also I make these videos to help share all the amazing things about Cantonese culture. Because on top of that, there's also the practical side too. Cantonese gives you access to, one of the most powerful diaspora networks on the planet. Most diaspora early on are Cantonese. When you connect on the fact that you're Cantonese, it's so much richer. We all know Hong Kong has got a lot of ballers too, right? So it's just like there's so many benefits. And the trust and connection you get when you walk into a Cantonese community and speak the language is so much better. You can't buy that, right? You know it because in the same way, when we try to have someone in Mandarin but we can't, you lose a bit of trust and connection as well. And so it's the same but in reverse. But those are all reasons for the diaspora to want to keep it. But for the diaspora specifically, people like me who grew up overseas, there's one reason that towers above all, and that one is family. See, growing up, my Cantonese was okay. To get by at family dinners, I have to understand what my parents were saying most of the time. But there was this gap that I didn't notice until it was too late. Because I could say, I'm hungry, I'm tired, and yeah, dinner was good. But when I was struggling with something real, when I didn't know what I was doing in my life, when I needed actual advice from my parents, when I wanted to tell them about how I really felt, my opinions, what I wanted to do, I didn't have the Cantonese to go there, and they didn't have the English. So we just didn't. We talked around the edges of real conversation for years. And that's what language loss actually looks like. It doesn't mean silence. It means shallow. My parents and I could communicate about, logistics. Like, did you eat? when you're coming home. But the deeper stuff, right? The conversation that actually shape our relationship, that actually shapes who you are. Those need a shared language, and it can't be surface level. And we didn't have that. Even if you look at a study, right? A 2010 study looked at Chinese American families specifically and found that when this language gap exists, it predicted, apparently, clinical depression, right? So this is what I saw. Not just feeling a bit disconnected, depression in both the parents and the children. And so parents feel incompetent because they can't express what they want to say, whereas children feel misunderstood because they can't hear what their parents actually mean and they can't express what they actually mean. Both sides hurt. On top of that, the elderly. A 2021 study found that elderly parents who can't communicate deeply with their family aren't just lonely, they're at measurably higher health risk. And so this one really got to me is a 2023 study actually asked elderly immigrants what makes them feel the most isolated. And the number one answer wasn't discrimination, it wasn't poverty, it wasn't mobility, it was not being able to talk to their grandchildren. And this is something that I relate to because growing up, I had trouble talking to my grandparents. I have a whole video on it. One of my biggest regrets before my grandpa died was that my Chinese was so bad early on in my life, I was never able to connect with him. And that really hit me because I know that my parents are gonna be my kids' grandparents, right? My mom, my dad, one day they're gonna be sitting across from my kid at a dinner table. And whether my kid can actually talk to them, that depends on my ability and whether I pass the language on. So I've seen it play out, I'm 30 now, holy crap, I'm old. I've seen it play out in my family dinner where I have cousins who taught their kid Cantonese and cousins who didn't. And the ones who did, it's cool. It's like a nice real family dinner. Whereas the ones who didn't, like their parents, the grandparents now, my uncle basically, they just left out because the parents obviously want to engage with their kids. And so it's just like the parents with their kids and then the parents of my cousins, my uncles basically are left out. There's no real connection, no real conversation. And it sucks. It's just like, I want my kids to have a connection with my parents, right? These are going to be easily the most important people in my life. And I don't want my parents to have to be left out at the dinner table. Or I don't want my kids to have to be left out at the dinner table because they can't speak the language. And that's what really made it so important for me to pass this on. So that my kid doesn't grow up saying, I'm Cantonese, but I can't speak it because my parents never taught me. I don't want that to be their story. I want them to feel what I feel when I speak this language, that it's theirs. Right, that it means something. Which is why, this is going on for a while, right? But we all know Mandarin opens doors, right? I'm not gonna pretend it doesn't. But Cantonese gives me access to my family, my history, a part of myself that no other language can teach. And I refuse to be the generation where that disappears. And that's why it was so important for me to improve my Cantonese while also learning Mandarin so that I can be where I am at now and I can feel confident passing that language on to the next generation. Because like I said, at this point now, no one is trying to kill Cantonese. But they're not gonna say, we're gonna make sure they speak it, right? If you want that to happen, that's on you. And so I hope, that's why we built Canton and Mando. People come to us wanting to learn Mandarin and we help them. But what a lot of people don't realize is that our biggest mission on top of that is to help people improve their Cantonese so that they can be able to have close relations with their families. Mandarin is just a sexy rapper because that's what everyone's talking about now, But Cantonese is the real goal. And so, remember that highway metaphor earlier? Mandarin is the highway, right? It needs to exist. But when a highway gets built through your town, you have two choices. You can yell at the highway or you can give people a reason to stop at your town. And that's what's happening right now, right? People in Guangzhou march the streets to give people a reason to stop. A Gen Z girl from Guangzhou who grew up speaking Mandarin went back and learned Cantonese because the town was worth stopping at. Hong Kong is filling stadiums with Cantopop because the music, the culture, the identity is worth stopping at. And so food, culture, all these things. And I hope that, I have no doubt it's gonna stay going strong in China, in Malaysia, all these places, right? It's not going anywhere. My only concern is for the diaspora community. And so I hope that if you're a Cantonese speaker watching this, I hope you feel the same way, the same passion to keep your culture alive, which is why if you're a Cantonese speaker and you want to improve your Cantonese while also learning Mandarin, right, but more importantly, improve your Cantonese, right, click to watch the video over here. I'll show you how to do that. And otherwise, click here to watch the video YouTube things you'll love. Thank you so much for watching this video. I know it was long, but I hope that inspired you because I feel really passionate about this topic.